It was a typical morning at the corporate office. The hum of the air conditioning blended with the soft tapping of keyboards, and the faint sound of chatter echoed through the open, planned space. Employees were glued to their screens, absorbed in their work, while coffee cups sat on desk and emails pinged away in the background. It seemed like just another day. At the center of it all was Steven Seagal, the CEO. He had worked hard to build this company from the ground up, and he was proud of the progress. As he walked through the office, his presence went unnoticed. Dressed in a simple suit, he blended in seamlessly with the rest of his employees, his calm demeanor making him look just like any other employee. The office was peaceful, even serene. The sunlight filtered in through the large windows, casting soft light on the desks and creating a warm, tranquil atmosphere. Families were waking up to their routines at home, unaware of the corporate world's quiet buzz. Musicians on the street outside strummed their guitars, adding a touch of melody to the morning. All around, there was nothing that would suggest that today would be different. But little did anyone know, that peace was about to be shattered. There was something off about the atmosphere, a feeling of unease, a sense of something hiding in plain sight. Steven wasn't just walking through his office. He was undercover. His mission to uncover the dark secret that no one had suspected until now. Because one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The morning was moving along, but the quiet calm in the office was slowly giving way to something much more chaotic. As Steven walked deeper into the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in the air that he couldn't quite place, a quiet hum beneath the usual hustle and bustle. He had been in this business for years, and though he wasn't one to jump to conclusions, something about the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't long before he noticed him. Greg Hansen, the department manager, was standing in the middle of the office floor. His posture was stiff, his face flushed with impatience. His voice echoed through the open space as he barked orders to his subordinates. He wasn't just managing his team, he was dominating them. The employees under his command looked tense, their shoulders hunched, as if walking on eggshells. Greg wasn't new to the company, but his presence had grown larger, his attitude darker. He had quickly gained a reputation for being a hard-nosed, no-nonsense manager. On the surface, that's what Steven thought he needed. Someone with authority who could keep things running smoothly. But as Steven observed from a distance, he began to see the cracks beneath the surface. There was something about Greg's leadership style that seemed more forceful than effective, and something about his body language made Steven suspicious. Just then, as Steven was passing the break room, he accidentally bumped into one of the employees, spilling her coffee all over the floor. He immediately apologized and offered to help clean up, but the employee barely glanced at him, her eyes glued to her phone. She looked stressed, hurried, her face pale. Steven could feel her anxiety, and it only added to his growing concern. The peaceful atmosphere was fading fast. As Steven made his way deeper into the office, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something serious was unfolding. The tension was rising. And then, as if on cue, Greg entered the scene. Greg had been walking briskly toward his office when he collided with one of his employees, a young man named Mark, who was carrying a stack of papers. The papers scattered across the floor, and Mark scrambled to gather them up. But Greg didn't offer help. Instead, he snapped, "Watch where you're going, Mark." Greg's voice was like a whip, loud and sharp, cutting through the room. "You're making me look bad in front of everyone. Get it together." The young man, his face flushed with embarrassment, apologized quickly and started picking up the papers. But Greg wasn't done. He stood over him, towering in a way that made Mark shrink even further. "I don't care how many mistakes you've made, but if you keep messing up, I'll make sure you regret it," Greg threatened, his voice low and menacing. Steven watched the interaction from a distance, feeling a sense of unease building in his chest. This wasn't just a stern boss reprimanding an employee. It was intimidation, control, manipulation. Greg wasn't managing his team, he was breaking them down, and what struck Steven the most was the way Greg did it. There was no empathy, no understanding, just power, pure and simple. Greg was getting away with treating his team like this, and no one seemed to be standing up to him. The other employees had either turned a blind eye or kept their heads down, afraid to speak out. But Steven wasn't just an outsider. He was the CEO of this company, and he had a responsibility to his people. Steven could feel the tension in the room building. The way Greg was treating Mark wasn't just wrong, it was toxic. This was a manager who had crossed a line, a man who wasn't just pushing his team to perform, he was using fear and intimidation to get results. And Steven knew he had to act, but how? As Steven stood there, thinking of what to do, Greg noticed him for the first time. His eyes locked on Steven, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition. Greg, used to having everyone in the office bend to his will, took a step toward him, his face hardening. "Is there a problem, Mr. Seagal?" Greg asked, his voice laced with sarcasm, as if daring Steven to challenge him. "I'm just doing my job, making sure these people know what's expected of them." Steven's calm expression didn't waver. "I think it's time we had a conversation, Greg," he said evenly. His voice was soft but firm, sending a clear message. This wasn't just a passing issue. This was something much deeper. "Before we continue, we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed workplace bullying or unfair leadership? Share your thoughts in the comments below."
Your stories matter.
As Steven continued to observe Greg, he could feel the tension in the air grow thicker. The office had become a pressure cooker, and Greg was the one cranking up the heat. He continued to bark orders at his team, pushing them harder and harder, and the underlying hostility in his tone was becoming more and more evident. Greg's verbal insults escalated as the minutes passed. It wasn't just the employees who could feel it. The entire atmosphere had shifted. People had started to notice the toxic energy radiating from him. Steven could see how the team was being crushed under the weight of Greg's constant demands, as though he were trying to assert dominance over every aspect of their work. "I don't care how many times you've done this task, Mark." Greg yelled at one of the employees. "You can't seem to get it right, and if you keep screwing up like this, I'll make sure you're out of here by the end of the day." Mark, who had been trying his best despite the impossible workload, shrank back, his face red with embarrassment. It wasn't just a reprimand. Greg's words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and piercing. He wasn't merely trying to correct a mistake. He was attacking Mark's dignity. It was clear this was personal for Greg, a power trip, not a leadership moment. Steven felt his pulse quicken as he watched the scene unfold. It wasn't just the verbal abuse that was unsettling. It was the way Greg enjoyed it, the smug look on his face as he saw the fear in his employees' eyes. It was the confidence that, in his position, he could get away with it. The atmosphere in the office had now become thick with discomfort. Employees were starting to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, glancing at each other as if hoping someone else would do something. No one spoke up. They were all scared. Scared of losing their jobs, scared of Greg's anger, scared of stepping out of line. Steven could feel their collective fear. "Greg, that's enough," Steven said, his voice cutting through the rising tension in the room. But Greg, seemingly oblivious to the growing discomfort around him, shot Steven a quick glance. His expression was one of arrogance, almost as if he couldn't care less who was in the room. "What's the matter, Mr. Seagal?" Greg sneered. "You don't think I'm doing my job?" He chuckled under his breath, looking over his shoulder at the employees, who were now all nervously looking at their feet. "These people need discipline. They need to understand that I'm in charge here. If I don't push them, they'll never get anywhere." Steven stood his ground, his calm demeanor unshaken. "You're not pushing them, Greg. You're breaking them down." Greg's eyes flashed with irritation. He didn't like being questioned. He was used to being the one in control, the one who made the rules. But Steven wasn't like the others. Steven had been watching, quietly observing. And he was no longer going to let Greg's bullying go unnoticed. The difference between pushing and breaking someone down is respect, Steven said quietly, his voice unwavering. At this point, several employees had stopped pretending to work. They weren't busy with their tasks anymore. They were watching. Every eye in the room was now fixed on Greg and Steven, waiting to see how this would play out. The tension was unbearable. It wasn't just a confrontation between a manager and an employee anymore. It was about something bigger, the power dynamic in the entire office. Greg, sensing his authority being questioned, shot back respect. Respect is earned. These people need to understand who they work for, and what I say goes. If they can't handle that, then they have no place here. Steven could feel the anger building within him. It wasn't just about how Greg was treating the employees. It was about the way he was manipulating them, making them feel small, unimportant. It was clear that Greg didn't care about the well-being of his team. He cared about one thing only: control. The employees were no longer just passive observers. They were beginning to shift, to murmur among themselves. They were starting to see what Steven had already known. This wasn't just a tough manager. This was someone who had used fear to establish his power. In that moment, the silence in the room felt heavy. No one dared to say anything, but the collective discomfort was palpable. The quiet anxiety in the air shifted into something else, something that could no longer be ignored. Steven's gaze never left Greg's face. He wasn't about to back down, not now. The power in the room had shifted, and for the first time, it was no longer just Greg who had control. Then, Greg crossed a line he could never uncross. The tension in the room was unbearable. Greg, still standing tall with his chest puffed out, stared at Steven like a lion ready to pounce. His arrogance had reached its peak, and he believed no one, not even the CEO, would challenge him. The air was thick with the weight of the confrontation, and Steven knew that the moment had arrived. This wasn't just about correcting Greg's behavior. It was about stopping a toxic force from further destroying the culture of the company. You think you can walk in here and tell me how to manage? Greg sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. I built this team from the ground up, and I don't need a CEO telling me how to do my job. His face reddened with anger, veins popping on his neck as his temper flared. You want to show me how to lead? You think you can do better? Steven stood his ground. His voice remained calm, almost soothing, as he replied, This is about respect, Greg. You're leading with fear, and that's not leadership. You've lost their respect by treating them like tools instead of people. And now, you've crossed the line. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Greg's face contorted with rage as he took a step forward, towering over Steven. The employees, already on edge, held their breath. Everyone knew something was about to happen, something big. Greg wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to someone looking him in the eye without backing down. The pressure built up inside him, his frustration reaching a boiling point. In one swift motion, he swung his hand back and slapped Steven across the face. The sound of the slap was deafening, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The shockwave rippled through the room, and for a split second, everything stopped. The employees froze in place, unable to process what had just happened. The moment felt like it had been suspended in time. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react the way anyone would expect after being slapped in front of a room full of people. Instead, he remained perfectly still, his calm demeanor unbroken. His hand went to his cheek, where Greg's slap had landed, but there was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet, almost eerie sense of control. Greg, on the other hand, was trembling with anger, his face twisted in disbelief at the lack of reaction. He was expecting Steven to retaliate, to get defensive, to fight back in some way. But Steven didn't give him the satisfaction. He didn't give him the reaction he was craving. For a moment, the office seemed frozen in time. The employees watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Some were wide-eyed. Others had their hands over their mouths, but none dared to move. It was as if the slap had broken some invisible barrier, and now they were all trapped in the aftermath. Greg's chest heaved as he stood there, eyes wide, a mix of fury and confusion flooding his expression. What, you just going to stand there and take it? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Is that it? But Steven still said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any words could. Greg's anger grew, his hands clenching into fists, his entire body tense. He had expected to crush Steven with his words, with his power, but he had underestimated the man in front of him. Greg's mistake was thinking that control over others was enough to maintain respect. But Steven knew better. True power didn't come from dominating others, it came from within, and the more Greg pushed, the more he revealed his own weakness. It was then that Steven made a small, deliberate gesture. He looked at Greg, his eyes unwavering, and took a slow, deep breath. He wasn't going to raise his voice, he wasn't going to escalate the situation further. He was letting Greg hang himself with his own actions. As the silence stretched on, Steven finally spoke, his voice steady and calm. You've made your choice, Greg, and you've crossed a line that you can never come back from. The room was still dead silent. The employees were paralyzed, watching every moment unfold, unable to tear their eyes away from the drama in front of them. Steven had shown them what true leadership was, not through power, not through anger, but through control and calm in the face of aggression. Greg stood there fuming, realizing for the first time that he was not in control of this situation. And it was clear his reign was about to come to an end. But the man didn't react the way anyone expected. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. What had started as a verbal confrontation with Greg had spiraled into something much deeper. The slap had silenced everyone, and now there was an uneasy stillness in the air. The employees were watching, but Steven wasn't the one making noise. He was calm, composed, almost unnervingly so, as if he were a man standing above it all, watching an inevitable storm unfold. Greg was still fuming. He couldn't understand why Steven hadn't reacted the way he thought he would. His anger was written all over his face, the flushed red cheeks, the clenched fists, the way he paced back and forth like a caged animal. He wasn't used to being ignored, to being disrespected like this, especially not in front of his team. The fact that Steven hadn't responded the way Greg had expected only made him angrier. "You're a fool," Greg spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think I'm scared of you? You think you can do whatever you want just because you're the CEO?" He took a step toward Steven, his body tensing like a spring ready to snap. But Steven didn't flinch. His eyes remained locked on Greg, unwavering and calm. There was something about Steven's demeanor that unnerved Greg even more. He couldn't understand how someone could remain so calm in the face of his rage. But Steven wasn't just calm. He was controlled, like a force of nature that could level everything in its path, but only when the time was right. "I tried to stop you, Greg," Steven said quietly, his voice carrying across the room. "Not for me, but for you." Greg's eyes narrowed, confusion flickering in his expression. "What the hell are you talking about?" he growled, taking another step forward. "You've got nothing on me." Steven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder as though he were waiting for something, or someone. The shift in his demeanor wasn't lost on Greg, and the unease began to grow in his chest. He took a moment to survey the room, as though sensing something was different. The employees were no longer staring at the floor or avoiding eye contact. No, now, they were watching him. They were waiting for him to make a move, and they were silently choosing sides. Greg's confidence was beginning to crack. "I don't need to say much more," Steven continued, his voice barely above a whisper, but his words cutting through the room like a sharp blade. "But I'll give you a warning. What you've done to this team, it's going to catch up with you. You're not alone in this. You're never alone when the walls start closing in." Greg laughed. It was a bitter, mocking sound. "Walls closing in. What, you think I'm scared of you? You can't do anything to me. I'm in control here, not you." Steven's gaze remained steady. His calmness was like a challenge. It was as if he were daring Greg to keep pushing, daring him to test his limits. "You don't even know what you've started," Steven said softly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not the only one who sees what's happening here. And trust me, Greg, the real consequences are about to unfold." Greg blinked, the mocking grin on his face faltering for a split second. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something in Steven's words that made his gut twist. It wasn't just the threat of losing his job. It was something bigger, something far more serious. The man standing before him wasn't simply the CEO. He was something else. Something he had grossly underestimated. A shadow seemed to fall across Greg's face. The cocky confidence that had once fueled his every word started to crack. He wasn't sure what Steven meant, but there was no denying that something was brewing, something that had been set in motion the moment Steven had walked into the office undercover. And now, it was too late to stop it. "I've given you plenty of chances, Greg," Steven said, taking a step closer. His eyes were cold, calculated, as if the moment of reckoning had already arrived. "But this is where your empire of lies comes to an end." Greg, finally feeling the weight of Steven's words, took a shaky breath. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but he knew deep down that he had pushed this too far. The silence was thick, the employees frozen in place, as if the world outside had stopped turning. They were waiting. And Greg was about to learn just how much of a mistake he had made. Because the real danger wasn't standing in front of him. Do you think Greg will finally face the consequences of his actions? Or will he find a way to escape? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss how you would handle a situation like this. The tension in the office was palpable. Greg had been brimming with arrogance, but now he was faltering, unsure of what Steven had meant by his cryptic warning. There was an undeniable shift in the room, and it wasn't just about the confrontation anymore. It was about something far more serious, the downfall of the empire Greg had built on manipulation, fear, and corruption. As Greg stood there, his chest heaving with frustration, Steven calmly reached into his suit pocket. His movements were deliberate, controlled, as though the entire situation had been planned down to the smallest detail. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. Greg's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say a word. He could feel the ground beneath him starting to shake, but his pride still wouldn't let him show weakness. Steven placed the folder on the table in front of him, sliding it across to Greg. "Everything you've done, Greg, everything you've been hiding from these people is right here," Steven said quietly. "The lies, the manipulation, the shady deals." Greg looked down at the folder. His confidence wavered for the first time. The weight of the moment was heavy. He could feel his heart racing in his chest. He had always been so careful, so sure that no one would ever find out. How could Steven have uncovered it all? His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Steven looked at him, his expression calm but filled with a quiet resolve. "You thought you could push these people around, exploit them for your own gain, and get away with it, didn't you? But you're not the only one who's been paying attention." The employees, once afraid to speak up, were now watching in silence, their gazes fixed on Greg and the folder in front of him. The energy in the room had shifted from fear to something else, anticipation. It was as if everyone was finally starting to realize that someone had stepped up, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the toxic culture Greg had created. Greg's face went pale. His eyes darted between the folder and Steven. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing panic. "Everything, Greg," Steven replied. "The shady financial transactions, the harassment, the secret deals behind closed doors, it's all here. It's all in black and white." Greg took a step back, his mind spinning. He had never thought anyone would catch on to what he'd been doing. He was careful. He was always a step ahead, or so he thought. But now, he was staring at the proof of his actions, laid out for everyone to see. He reached for the folder, his hands shaking, but before he could even touch it, the door to the office slammed open, and a group of federal agents stormed in. The employees who had been holding their breath now exhaled collectively. The tension in the air was replaced by the quiet shuffle of boots on the floor. One of the agents, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped forward. "Steven Seagal?" he asked, his voice firm. Steven nodded calmly, his gaze never leaving Greg. "Yes, I'm the one who uncovered everything." The agent turned to Greg, his face stern and unflinching. "Greg Hansen, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and corruption. You have the right to remain silent." Greg's world began to unravel in front of him. His hands went up as if to protest, but the agents moved swiftly, securing him in cuffs. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His body trembled as he was escorted from the office, the truth of his actions now exposed for everyone to see. The room was silent, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone. Steven watched as Greg was led out of the office, his heart steady and his expression composed. There was no sense of satisfaction on his face. This wasn't about winning. This was about doing what was right for the company, for the employees, for the integrity of the organization. As the door closed behind the agents, the room seemed to breathe again. Employees, who had once been paralyzed by fear, now felt a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, they were free from the oppressive weight of Greg's leadership. They looked at Steven, their silent gratitude written in their eyes. Steven turned to the team, his voice calm yet commanding. "This is what happens when we allow one person to take advantage of the many. But this is also a reminder that we stand together. We hold each other accountable, and we never let anyone destroy our integrity." That's when the bully realized who he had truly underestimated. The room remained silent as the federal agents escorted Greg out, and the heavy weight of what had just transpired began to sink in. For the first time in years, the employees felt a sense of relief, as if a toxic cloud that had hung over them for far too long had finally lifted. They exchanged glances, some of them with tears in their eyes, others with a quiet, unspoken sense of gratitude. The oppressive tension had evaporated in an instant, replaced by something far more powerful: hope. But Steven didn't allow the moment to linger in triumph. His expression remained calm, his demeanor as composed as it had been from the beginning. He wasn't here to gloat, or to enjoy the downfall of a man who had treated his employees like pawns in his power game. No, for Steven, this wasn't about winning. It was about doing what was right. He turned slowly to face the employees, who were still in shock at the turn of events. They were watching him, waiting for him to speak. There was a quiet expectation in the air, an anticipation of the message he was about to deliver. You've all been through a lot, Steven said softly, his voice resonating through the stillness of the room. I know that many of you felt trapped under Greg's leadership. His methods weren't leadership, they were manipulation. And when you have someone like that in power, it's easy to lose yourself, to become a mere cog in their machine. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. But that's not who you are. That's not who we are. We are a team. And we stand for something more than just fear and control. We stand for respect. We stand for accountability. We stand for doing what's right, no matter the cost. Steven's gaze swept across the room, meeting each employee's eyes. There was no anger in his eyes, no sense of revenge. There was only a quiet understanding. He knew that many of them had struggled with Greg's behavior. But he also knew that they had been waiting for someone to step up and make it right. And that's exactly what he had done, not with force, not with threats, but with integrity. As the CEO, it's my responsibility to ensure that this company is a place where everyone can thrive, Steven continued. No one should ever feel threatened, belittled, or taken advantage of. And that's why, moving forward, we are going to rebuild this company with a foundation built on respect and trust. We will support each other, and we will hold each other accountable always. The employees, many of whom had been afraid to speak up, now found their voices. There were murmurs of agreement, nods, and even quiet applause. It was a moment of collective catharsis, a moment of unity and strength that hadn't been felt in this office for years. For the first time in a long time, they were finally free of the fear that had been controlling them. Steven smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the weight of what they had all just been through. It's not about revenge, he said. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter who is in front of you. And today, you all did that. You didn't just stand up for yourselves, you stood up for each other. And that's something we can all be proud of. He took a deep breath, then added, and I'll say this one last thing: respect is not a privilege. It's a right, and it's something that should never be taken for granted. We all deserve it, no matter who we are, no matter what our position is. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them. But as the silence hung in the air, it wasn't oppressive anymore. It wasn't heavy. It was a moment of peace, of understanding, and of clarity. If you believe that respect should be given to everyone, regardless of their position, comment Raspusu below. What do you think about Steven's approach? Do you believe in leadership through integrity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss how leadership should be done in the workplace,